Hi everyone, my name is Anthony Cummins and welcome to this video. I want to talk to you today about 3 basic things you should not underestimate in medieval warfare. Now this can be anywhere, and in truth you could probably say this could go for warfare anywhere. But seeing as I like medieval warfare and that's what I do, I'm going to talk about it in that context. These 3 things I consider to be what a ruling class in their time would put a massive amount of effort into. And the reason I'm making this video is I think that on the whole, when we read medieval history, we read it with a modern mind. Now I agree, there are lots of elements where we are the same as them. We're all human, we've all got the same emotions, and we have a very, quite a connected existence. For example, in Japan, they still have a connection to the medieval period there, and in England we obviously have a very strong connection. We still live under a monarchy, and we still have dukes and duchesses and all this type of thing going on, and we've got the same rules that were in existence, or partially rules that have come from them. So while we do have connection to them, I do think as well we look too much from a modern point of view. So what I'm going to do is go through the 3 things now and see what you think. Number 1, never underestimate the amount of manpower that a ruling family will conscript or bring together to defeat or kill the enemy. I mean, they can pull in ridiculous amounts of manpower here, and you can go for all the different places all over the world. For example, we can go to extremes like building the Great Wall of China. The idea of the amount, is it called the Wall of Tears because of all the manpower and people who died using it. You can literally oppress people into doing almost anything at fear of sword point. And you've got examples like that. And for the rest of it, just don't be surprised or don't be dubious when they say they got so many people together to do such and such a labour, to build such and such a thing, because at the end of the day, in some places and at some time, human life and human labour was cheap. At other times, recently there's been an experiment for a castle in France, and they're building a medieval castle based on the original ways, and they've done it originally, and they've showed that some of the masons who worked there were paid really well. So you can't always see it as conscripted violence. They've literally brought it together, and they've brought the correct amount of people, and they've paid the amount, possibly over the odds. The amount of money that the ruling class have put in to getting that thing built would have been phenomenal. And yes, some people would have been paid really well. But again, it's the same. Don't underestimate how much they will actually spend and how much manpower will be used in defending themselves and attacking the enemy. So this leads on to the second point, which is finance. You cannot, under any circumstances, underestimate the amount of money that is spent on warfare. Now, you could go to any country in the modern world, or the first world country in the modern world, and look at their budgets for warfare. Look at their armed service budget. You could do this, you could easily get this information on the internet if you fancy it. Go there and look at the billions of pounds, billions of dollars that are spent on the armed services every year. There is no difference between now and then. Even then, the amount of money that was put into equipment, training, troops. Now, of course, this is a little bit different in that normally it's based on a feudal system, so people have their own land and they get stuff from that, and they give war effort back. They give their effort back instead of tax, and there's lots of different systems around the world. But what you have to realise is that there's vast amounts of money. This idea, for example, that a samurai had his one sword and that was all he had, and he went to battle. No, a samurai would be togged up in armour. He'd have, if he could afford it, a horse, a spear, a long sword, a dagger, a short sword. He'd have a bow and an arrow. He'd possibly have gunpowder. The ruling class would be supplying gunpowder, muskets. There are catching rakes. There are so many different pieces of samurai equipment that were used on the battlefield, even down to shields, portable shields, shields on wheels, retractable bridges, semi-temporary erected fortifications. The money involved was colossal. Now, of course, money involved is also manpower used. What do you control? It's not physically coin all the time. But my point is here is Like, you look at the Romans, it's like we've got an army of soldier engineers who come along and there's, oh look, a valley, well, build a bridge over it. You know what I mean? And they'll literally build a bridge over it because they've got the manpower and they've got the finance. They build networks of roads. They build huge castles. I'm talking about, you know, medieval times here. What you've got to remember is the fact that they have got... Don't underestimate the amount of manpower they'll put in. Then don't underestimate the amount of money they will put in. There's phenomenal amounts of money here. That leads me on to the third one. You've had massive amounts of manpower. You've got massive amounts of money. And now you're looking at determination and cruelty. Now you have to realise that in days of old, there was ethics and there were morals, but they were different to ours. And you can see when somebody does something unethical. Like in the Crusades, there's the massacre of the 3,000 people. They couldn't take them as hostages, they didn't know what to do with them, so they literally just butchered them, 3,000 people. And that went down as an absolutely horrible event. Or when you get the sack of Jerusalem, they run in and basically everybody gets murdered. That is always remembered, even to this day, as like, you know, an horrific event. So, but of course, you know, killing people horrifically was not always seen as bad. But my point here is you've got to remember that they will go to absolute extremes in cruelty and determination to kill their enemy or defend themselves. People in power never want to lose power. There's never a power group who wanted to actively lose power. They generally try to keep it. So, but on the other hand, you have to remember that also sometimes, because of the way we're educated nowadays with TV, you get the wrong impression. Like, for example, the idea of people being tortured in medieval England and, you know, with big torture devices. Some of those devices were actually made in Victorian times as curiosities, and at certain periods in English history, torture was totally illegal. I read the other day of a man who had to be taken to Scotland to have thumb screws used because it was illegal in England to torture these people. So what you have to remember is that while cruelty is massive in the medieval world, there's also a moral line there. And what's their ethical line? And that is to be decided for every single time period and every single geographical location. But my point to you is nowadays, you know, the last sort of great wars, as we know, is World War I, World War II, when they were just like slaughtering millions en masse. And now we still have a tragedy in the world and we still have lots of people dying, but we tend to not have a mass. Like, you know, let's murder everyone, you know, women, children, people. Like the new film came out recently, which is The American Sniper, where they decide, do they not shoot a boy with, you know, a bomb or whatever. In the old days, it was just like take the village out. And if you did it to too many people, you were known as a cruel person. And we can go back to Vlad the Impaler and all that. So, to round up, remember that in medieval warfare, there's lots of manpower. They will use people day in, day out for months on end, building, doing anything they want. And, you know, they can be conscripted or paid, but there's massive amounts of work. Second is finance. There is a ridiculous amount of finance goes into warfare, and it is no different now and it is no different then. It's just money. If you want to conduct war, you need cash. Lots of cash. And lastly is cruelty. Do not be, put off by the amount of cruelty involved. Just accept that it did happen. But also temper that and know that there were certain rules and there were moral codes. Okay, my name's Anthony Cummins. I hope you enjoyed that. What I want you to do is, can you put some examples down below of massive amounts of manpower? Can you put examples of massive amounts of finance or massive amounts of cruelty used in medieval warfare? It can be from anywhere and almost any time, you know, early medieval to late medieval warfare, or if you want, just go outside of it. It doesn't really matter. I'll try and read as many comments as possible. So leave them all down below, and if you don't know, pass this video around and ask your friends. Subscribe if you want to know more about medieval warfare and the samurai in particular.